ever since Liberation Day, April 2nd, 2025, the odds of a Great Depression 2.0 have gone up, from some non-zero event to something larger. If you don't understand the tariffs that were at least rolled out, they were larger and more far-reaching than what is often called the greatest mistake ever, which was the Smoot-Hawley Act. Obviously, there were additional mistakes like Fed intervention and the like that made the Great Depression worse. I thought we should just talk about what might be happening now. How do we avoid it? How could we go the wrong way? What decisions could lead us down the Great Depression 2.0 or maybe help us avoid it? We're going to do this, of course, with Anna Kelly. How you doing, Anna?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's really funny for me to think that we don't learn from history, right? The Smoot-Hawley Act is, if you have an econ degree, which I do, you are in finance, wealth banking. We've all studied the Great Depression, the mistakes, the pain that was caused by it. We've all seen the breadlines. Not a good time in U.S. history. But it's funny that Liberation Day brought a average tariff that was higher than Smoot-Hawley. And again, Smoot-Hawley came out. Why? To protect American industries, to make sure that we weren't at some disadvantage. Sounds very similar to Liberation Day to me, Anna.
Yeah, I think history definitely teaches us some lessons if we want to listen to them. We're often not taught what those lessons are, right? And if we are taught, we're taught when we're kids, when we don't understand it. And so we think it doesn't matter. So we kind of forget. So it's important when you're going through things to say, has this ever happened before? And it's interesting, Michael, I won't go on too far of a tangent, but my daughter, who is in 8th grade, just did a history lesson on the presidents that were in place and, during the time of the Smoot-Hawley and all the fallout from that. And I was like, wow, it seems like we're doing the same things today that they did in there. And so I went through all of her notes. I was like, I don't remember any of this. I remember a little bit of it from watching the movie, the theater Hamilton, that my kids love. But it is quite uncanny how much what's happening today, as much as there's many differences, there's a lot of similarities, right? So, the question is, do we go into some type of Great Depression? And I'm going to be more optimistic that we don't. The reasons for that optimism are not necessarily good. But one thing that I will say is that our government has gotten better. Our government has gotten better in the short term at preventing deep recessions or depressions. They just kick the can down the road so that we have more risk in the long term of it happening even worse in the future. So if you ask me today, do I think we're going into a Great Depression in the next year or two? I would say no. But if they don't handle well the global fallout of the complete about face and turning of who America wants to be to the world, whether we play nice in the sandbox, whether we fund the economies of other worlds, or whether we truly go back to America First policies, deglobalization, those things are definitely going to cause some pain in the next couple of years. I have no doubt recession. I think we're in it, and I think it's going to get worse. I just think the government is going to do what the government does, and they're going to drastically cut interest rates. They're going to try to stimulate the heck out of it. They're going to pump a whole bunch of money into the economy. They're going to try to get us into a quick recovery, and then we're going to pay the piper in the future if we can't figure out how to pay for it all, get the debt down, and make growth happen in a real way for America. The alternative is hyperinflation and depression, maybe 10, 20 years from now.
That's not, frankly, a very rosy picture. I mean, I'll just be honest
with optimism. It's not going to happen soon.
Because when I think about it, I agree with the principle that we call it the government, call it the Fed, Treasury, whatever you want to call it. Their modus operandi now is when there's any pain, rain money down from the heavens, right? Print, money printer goes burr, whatever you want to call it. I want to believe that what I'll call the Fed put is not in play today. I think they know this detox period, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be painful. My fear is it's going to be more painful than they can even imagine. I don't know if you saw the consumer confidence numbers this morning.
Yes.
But the fact that we are at March of 2020 lows for consumer confidence should be a screaming red light for people. I mean, do you remember March of 2020? Stay in your house, spray your groceries with Lysol or whatever that nonsense was. We was freaking crazy. To think that the world today is uncertain as that does not leave me warm and fuzzy. Then we have the Fed that's very much, oh, the hard data looks good, but the soft data, doesn't. But we're only caring about the hard data. And then we have the Port of LA this morning saying that there's been 20 ship cancellations and, 40% expected to go down. And I'm like, I'm not, this feels like the ball's been dropped from the airplane and you can't stop it at this point, right? We're not Wile E. Coyote and just floating. This thing seems like it's going the wrong direction.
Yeah, so much there, Michael. I think, one of the things that just in general that I've learned, from looking back at history and the Fed, I have like a 4-volume history of the Federal Reserve that I started going through. I'm really a data and economics nerd to try to figure things out, right? But essentially, they're going to always try to save the system. And so even though Powell would like the Fed put to be dead, and he's done a pretty good job of not pivoting and saying, hey, the market's collapsing, we're going to cut. In fact, Donald Trump's calling him an idiot because he won't cut because he wants him to save the market. And he's not going to save the market. And Scott Bessent has come out, our Treasury Secretary, and said, it was Wall Street's turn. Now it's mainstream's turn. And so they are trying to not pivot. They're trying to hold strong. However, if things get bad enough and the recession gets bad enough and the global recession gets bad enough to where they're really worried about systemic break, they will sacrifice the dollar and the markets to save the system. And that's the bottom line. So even though I agree with you that they don't want to cut rates super low. If things are bad enough, they will not have another option but to do that, to try to promote confidence, say, yes, we came in, we're saving it, we'll figure out the rest later, but this was our number one threat, and we can't let the economy, the banking system, the bond market, we can't let it all collapse. And so when you start seeing unemployment really start to tick up, because all of these things come down to the consumer. The bottom line is, if you want your stock market to do well, you want companies to do well, you want people employed, you've got to have a strong enough economy that incentivizes companies to keep people on staff. Once they can no longer push their higher expenses, i.e. inflation, onto consumers, and the consumers cry uncle and say, we're out. And at that point, you're in a recession. And only after that does unemployment typically hike. And it's not until then that the Fed historically will cut rates. Once they cut rates, it creates some panic, like, oh no, it must be bad, or they wouldn't be cutting rates. And then you see even higher in layoffs and higher unemployment. And then the Fed goes drastically lower and cuts. And then the helicopter money comes out. So I just know this, Michael, they don't have any other playbook.
That is true. Yes.
They won't sacrifice the system. And so I would not say the put is dead. I would say the put is like not till we're on life support. And when it does happen, it tells you that things are bad. I think they will do it before the economy could get to a depression-like economy.
Well, that's so I agree with all of that. But in my mind, I always try to break out timelines.
Yeah.
And again, in my mind, it is my belief that the administration, including the Fed and Treasury Secretary Bessent and President Trump, they're frankly okay with a short-term recession. Like if you gave them true serum, they'd be like, we'll take it, right? If that helps us to get on a different path, break glass, go in a recession, great. I'll just blame the last guy. Right. It's soon enough in my administration where I could blame the last guy. Great.
Yep.
Got it. However, when you're okay with the recession, and I think they are, history says that, well-intentioned individuals sometimes let things get away. Yeah. And we right now have a situation where the consumer is as uncertain, as I said, of COVID. We've got international trade collapsing 40% and getting worse. We have potentially small business with 5, 6, 7 weeks of inventory before, maybe store shelves aren't empty, but they're certainly sparse. And if that kind of gets into the psychology of the U.S. consumer, let alone the world, and we have U.S. farmers basically crying uncle because they can't ship soybeans to China anymore. They're getting them from Brazil. This will take a recession. They may not have a choice. They may be just too late.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that I keep saying is, the mistake about, April Liberation Day was adding so much uncertainty in the way that they rolled out these supposed retaliatory tariffs.
They were not retaliatory tariffs. There was some made up number on trade deficits to call it.
They were trying to fix trade imbalances, not necessarily, fair or unfair taxation. But when you add such shock and awe, right, at a time when you've already got significant uncertainty and you've already got all the signs that we are in a private sector recession. Scott Bessent came out and said it a couple weeks ago. We are in a private sector recession. There will be some pain. We know that this is shocking. We have to reorder things and there will be some pain. Now, Trump may tweet, we're not going to have a recession, but he knows we're in a recession. Yes, a lot was to blame from the prior administration and from his prior administration and from the helicopter money under both. They're never going to take blame. But when you add a mistake on top of mistakes at a time when the economy is already struggling, at a time when there's a lot of global war going on, whether it's trade wars or whether it's hot wars, and then you make such a drastic change, there's gonna be a lot of uncertainty. And so I would argue we've been in a recession. I think that this Independence Day, whatever they call Liberation Day. Sorry, this Liberation Day, I think was kind of the nail in the coffin to make consumers so freaked out, companies, the stock market so freaked out, other nations so freaked out that it's kind of like pushing it off of a cliff a little further to where it becomes more obvious. And so I think, the recession is here. It's probably going to be more painful. And, Bessent said this is going to take 2 to 3 years to negotiate all the tariffs. And so if you listen to his interviews like I do, I'm like, I don't want to hear the news headline. I want to hear from the horse's mouth what he's saying in foreign meetings like the IMF and, the World Trade Organization. It's like, this is going to take some time. And the faster you come to us, the faster we can lower tariffs for everybody. So, again, we talked about in a prior last week or the week before, like pros and cons of will he be a genius or will he be like to blame for everything? Trump's tariffs, time will tell, but there is definitely more pain ahead. The thing that worries me, to your point of how bad can it be and is it too late, is, Bessent said in another interview that I read a few months ago, he said, the problem right now is that the economy is brittle. He used those words, the private sector recession, it's very brittle. And he said, if we have any other crisis, we cannot bail out our country. Our debt is too high. Therefore, number one goal is reduce our debt. And so if these policies that have been rolled out do prove to be mistaken in terms of maybe the good policy, the wrong timing and the wrong way, if that turns out to be too much, that it creates so much fear in the consumer, in companies, and in our allies and our good trading partners, it could be so drastic that the fallout is much deeper than any of us anticipate. And it will require them to try to bail us out despite all the debt. You're going to see a lot more infighting in Congress as they try to balance budgets and decide what to save and what not to. It could be a very, very, very bumpy ride and kind of a fourth turning of sorts. We've been talking about that a little bit if you haven't read about the fourth turning, but every society and every generation kind of has these turnings of, prosperity and then growth, and then start to kind of apathy and then decline and then fighting and everything reversing. And then people have to come and say, we have to create a whole new system, something new. And I think we're at that point where the world is turning. We're creating something new globally. in our own country economically. And in that is going to be a lot of winners and a lot of losers. There's going to be a lot of pain. I'm hopeful that, like every other major fourth turning, some people that are smart come together and say, okay, we created a huge mess. It's going to be hard to get out of, but there's some kind of new solutions that we haven't thought of, i.e. something different than let's save the system by printing money and cutting rates. So, it's an exciting time to live in. It's uncertain. It's a little scary. We have to be really wise and not just assume, everything's going to be better in 6 months and the economy is going to be raring to go again. It doesn't usually work that way. I think we're in for years of volatility and shakeout to see how are things going to shake out and what's going to be reordered. And then how is that going to impact society, us, our investments?
I like it. Again, folks, there's a lot going on right now. Stay tuned. Anna and I will be speaking each and every week. Check out our playlist. Anna, where can people find you?
You can find me on my website for real estate and wealth coaching and consulting at AnnaKellyInvesting.com, here on your show, and on social media at Anna Kelly, REI Mom.
There you go. Thank you.